Welcome to the weekly conversation we call Moral Side of the News. We're glad you're alongside. I'm John Blim with the WHAS Crusade for Children. Joining me, as always, a distinguished panel today. Rabbi Emeritus Stan Miles, Temple Shalom, Dr. Marian Taylor, South Frankfort Presbyterian Church, Reverend Clay Calloway, West Louisville Ministers Coalition, and Father Joe Graffis, Archdiocese of Louisville. After an attack on the nation's capital, a heavy military presence is in place in Washington, D.C., and the Capitol Mall is closed as we approach Inauguration Day. Meantime, President Trump has been impeached for, quote, incitement of insurrection for his role in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, making him the only president to be impeached twice. There are growing concerns that Inauguration Day will bring violence in the capitals of all 50 states, and there are questions about whether Congress can simultaneously work to enact President-elect Biden's COVID relief plan while holding an impeachment trial set to begin after President Trump leaves the White House. So now we turn to our panel on Moral Side of the News. And panelists, where do we begin?
Just jump in. I mean, this has been quite a whirlwind experience, especially since the last week. It's been quite a whirlwind and very revealing in so many ways. You have to just pick a spot, and wherever you drop the needle on the record, you're going to get some good sound, and that's kind of where it is. It's a tremendous revelation in so many ways that has occurred, especially since last week's attack on the Capitol, and then, of course, witnessing the impeachment yesterday also just kind of was a culmination of just what happened there. But it's a reckoning in so many ways. It's a kind of sad poetic justice that is being revealed with respect to the turmoil and the roller coaster ride from this administration. I think that ultimately some great good is going to come from it. We may talk about the path forward at the end of the broadcast, but I think that the impeachment was inevitable. If they didn't do it, it would not have been. They would have been derelict in their duties. So they were almost obligated to pursue this path. So it does sad, but it's clearly evidence that the system is working. Democracy held the line. It wasn't quite like the Alamo, but I think that they held the proverbial line for democracy's sake. And so in that regard, I think the fiber and the fabric of democracy held up. And for that, I think we can all be grateful.
I'm sorry, the attack was also, it wasn't an attack on the Democrats or an attack on the Republicans. It was an attack on our entire government.
Absolutely.
And I think that that all of the members of Congress, both House and Senate, are perceiving it as that. And with the president stimulating the discord, then the sad decisions that were made and are being made are the only logical decisions to make. The problem that I see now is that I had the opportunity to be on the program last week, and we taped last Thursday as we're taping this Thursday, and I'm just as confused and frightened now as I was then, and how ironic it is that when this program is broadcast, it will be one day before Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And the values that Dr. King taught and gave his life to promote, these values were just totally trashed by that invasion of our civic sacred space.
I'm going to build a little bit on Stan there, and I'm sure Clay or Marian will probably build, but knowing it was Dr. King's birthday actually Friday and is celebrated on Monday. Somebody emailed me recently and I said, remember Dr. King's book written in 1967, I believe, Where Do We Go From Here? And I said, oh gosh, I remember reading that book. And the second line, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Well, I have a copy of that book. So I pulled it out and said, I'm going to kind of reread through it again. And it was just amazing that 53 years ago this was written. It could have been written today with a lot of things. And little did we know 53 years ago. But I think that whole dilemma, you know, as you said, Clay, there's a lot of sadness, I think, in a lot of people about how did we get to this point of so much chaos and lack of accountability, and then people trying to make up for their lack of accountability. So maybe, God willing, that this is a real time, a moment to say, okay, gang, let's all be grown-ups now, on whether you're Democrat, Republican, purple, polka dot, whatever, and say, how do we come together? How do we build community back instead of chaos? And I think there are some hopeful signs. I think the most scary thing is that all the internet traffic that's going on about trying to do something during the similarly during the inauguration, which obviously now with 20,000 troops, which is so sad to have at an inauguration. Hopefully that won't happen, and hopefully there won't be a lot of chaos at state capitals, but that's going to be with us for a while. And I think we as a religious community really have some serious responsibility to try to bring people together and kind of tamp down some of the rhetoric and some of the hate, because these are all children of God, even if I don't agree with them. And how do we do that? And I think all of us, and I've been really disappointed, even in Louisville, that the religious community what we used to have a huge ecumenical interfaith community that would come together and would deal with this. That hasn't happened this year. And I think that's another loss that I'm seeing. Anyway, end of sermon.
Thanks. I want to build on the word that Clay used of reckoning, because I think that we would love to rush forward to healing and normalcy, sweep a lot of things under the carpet and just plunge ahead. I'd certainly love for a new president to be able to not have to deal with this reckoning. The problem is, though, that there is a kind of grace in reckoning that we have to, anytime that absolution is given, it's on the basis of a confession. And we have a situation where some of the perpetrators are still refusing to confess. So I have traveled in many countries. My political science was my main background. I have talked with a military doctor who defended the military's role in the dirty war in Argentina. I've been in Nicaragua during their civil war. I've talked with people who were sent into exile in China during their revolution, the radicalization of their revolution. And I think that if you look in terms of comparative political systems and what keeps a democracy alive and well, we are not superior to any of those people. The thing that protects us is that we allow our courts to determine matters of fact and an interpretation of law. We follow the procedures that are in our Constitution, and if we don't like them, we change them legally. And what's happened, and the reckoning that has to be faced, people want to say, well, President Trump's exact words during his speech were not so incendiary. It's the entire context in which He failed to establish matters of fact in courts of law and still would not admit to that. When he called and bullied state officials, even including Republicans, and then called people on January 6th for the express purpose of pressuring the US Congress to decide one way instead of another way, trying also to get the vice president to do certain things. And he will not take no for an answer. The reason we are a democracy is that George Washington agreed to step down. He could have held on to power too. So this is what makes a democracy: accepting the process, accepting that facts have to be established in court, not bullying people beyond all measure. This is why we have to have a reckoning, is so that people will understand what it takes to protect our political system. Now, this is the moral side of the news. Did God establish democracy? I don't think so. I think God just wants us to be loyal to God and live into the kind of community, moral community that God wants us to have. But democracy has proven to be the least bad of the systems that help us to do that. And we all need to rise to the occasion for that very reason.
Well, I think there's so much here. It's like collecting the manna that fell from heaven. There's so many little jewels and lessons and nuggets to feed on here that you have to just kind of pick a basket and just dive in. But so much has been brought to the forefront. I've been thinking a lot about the very popular statement, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Now that's true in ways that we probably took for granted before. So much has been revealed about disparity within our system. True, God does not prefer maybe democracy over another, but he does expect civility at the very least. He does expect us to love thy neighbor as yourself. So expect whatever form it is, be civil, be humane, and be civil in how you deal with people. And he does expect justice. That is almost a minimum requirement. So we're seeing all that come to the fore. It's amazing that the kind of the protests, they have compared a lot with the Black Lives Matter movement over the summer, and contrasting that with the so-called protest claim of the insurrectionists, I called them last week. One fundamental difference: the Black Lives Matter movement was trying to demand justice for a system that didn't work, but these protesters were complaining and protesting because the system did work. So they were not willing to accept a working system because they felt that they were entitled to a privileged system, and they didn't really want justice for all the way it's afforded to everybody. So you start to see the reality of democracy and the challenge of our so-called democracy. I've always called our form of government a paradocracy as much as anything, because so many paradox that was baked in the very inception of our form of government. But I think that with all that was broken, and I think that with this impeachment and so forth, it's beginning to make us realize we can't fix what we won't face, like James Baldwin said, and it's forcing this nation to face itself. I ran across an old movie that came out years ago with Marlon Brando called The Ugly American. And we always think that we're so pretty and that we're so beautiful to the world, but we have revealed to the world just how ugly we really are. So we've got to go to the mirror, face it in order to fix it. And I think this whole process is really, and we have to, kind of look at what this whole process has done. It has brought all of that ugliness to the forefront, so we can get ready to move forward to make things better.
I think one of the things that you brought up there is that democracy, or however the republic, is an ideal, and it was founded as an ideal, and it wasn't perfect when it started. It hasn't been perfect for 140 plus years, because nothing's going to be perfect, because we're composed of saints and sinners, present company excluded, of course. But And so, you know, sometimes I've heard people say, well, this is not who we are.
It is.
You know, it's what we're supposed to be, but yes, it does show us what we are, and both our faults as well as our virtues. And how do we, as any good religious value is, okay, we need to name our faults, overcome them, and try to live out some virtues. That's whether that's in any religious tradition or in our country. And of course, we mix up all of this stuff, religion and politics. We say it's separate, and then we see, as we saw at the Capitol last week, all kinds of religious symbols being used in the name of violence, which drives me crazy. And yet, sometimes we confuse all of this, because religion should be separate from the civil society, but it's engaged with the civil society to bring it the values, the moral questions, not to force that necessarily on society, but to pose the questions about what's the right thing to do at the right time. And I think all of that is really kind of, the water's gotten muddied. I read something recently that somebody, well, what do we need to do now? And somebody used the image of one of the congressmen was cleaning up the trash after,
Right.
and somebody said, that's an interesting image, that all of us need to get on the floor a little bit, to be a little more humble and say, we got to pick up the pieces, and what we can write, we write. What's broken, maybe we got to repair, or if it's destroyed, we've got to rebuild it. And I loved that image, and I said, I got to play with that a while.
Another image, going from what you said, Joe. I get the image of the Tower of Babel. No, people are talking at one another and demonstrating against one another. And there's precious little collaboration to work together. And I think that's where it has to start. And it has to start with the members of the Senate and the members of the Congress who put their lives on the line that last week, who I cannot imagine how traumatized those folks are. I cannot imagine the level of personal PTSD they're dealing with and will be dealing with for time to come. And hopefully they can come together in a rebuilding process, not just of the building that was trashed, but a rebuilding process of trust between human beings. It's so sad that it came to all this. But
you know, it's a lot of stand. I just had a thought. They used the 14th Amendment as the basis for the impeachment. And I called a friend of mine, an attorney friend of mine who is connected to the NAACP, and he reminded me that the 14th Amendment is the most litigated amendment by far of any other amendment in the Constitution, by far, hands down. And of course, the 14th Amendment grew from the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. So, and it was mainly to bring about a reconciliation for the nation in so many ways, and mainly because of the emancipation of slaves and to make them give them opportunity to become citizens, but also gave the Southerners a way to get back into the nation. So it had multiple benefits, the 14th Amendment. So, but also the fact that they used the Section 3 of that amendment that related to that they used to justify the impeachment, that was mainly put in there to prevent the Confederates from coming back in to running for public office. It was for the Jefferson Davises of the world and the Robert E. Lees of the world And ironically, I've never seen that reference used, and it applied, ironically enough, to Donald Trump. And I've often argued that Donald Trump can't compare to no president in history. You have to go back to Jefferson Davis to get a comparison to Donald Trump. And ironically, they use that very section of the 14th Amendment to use to impeach Donald Trump. I think there's a lot of irony and poetic justice within just that 14th Amendment application alone.
All right, follow-up question, everybody. There's lots of imagery here. 20,000 troops at the Capitol. You've seen those pictures, fences, barricades. They're putting trucks in place to keep people out. As you move forward and you talk to people in the few minutes we have left in our program, are you optimistic about what 2021 will bring after all this? Because it's been a heck of a way to start the year. And how will you encourage and talk to your congregations as you move forward?
I don't have a congregation at this time, but I've got to tell you, I am neither optimistic nor am I pessimistic. I am ambivalent because I just cannot see where things are going one way or the other. And because of my ambivalence, I'm simply frightened.
I'm not quite that pessimistic, Stan. I guess a word I've been using probably since Christmas that just really struck me is the word hope.
That's the word I was about to say.
Well, thank you. Amen, brother.
You beat me to it.
But, what constitutes hope? What gives us hope? What can give us hope? And I think, we're still in the middle of the pandemic, and Lord knows we're losing people right and left. And the hospital, I've been in a couple of hospitals lately trying to follow all the rules. And every nurse I said, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for what you're doing. We couldn't do it without you. I think there are so many good things that are happening underneath, and hopefully the vaccine is starting to get a little bit more, and hopefully in the next 2 months, I think things will get a little better if we're healthier and we don't have all the funerals that we're having. I wasn't totally a great fan of Joe Biden when he first started to run, because I thought, we need younger people. Speaking to myself, but I said, maybe God had a hand in this. I don't know, but he seems like he might be the right man for the right time. How he knows people on both sides of the aisle. He keeps talking about language of healing, and that's his empathy. And I'm not saying he's perfect, because no politician is perfect, but I think there's some hope. And if we have some competence in some of the people he's appointing, Lord knows we need some competence. I think we might start to see, but it's going to take, it will not happen in a week or a month or 6 months or a year. We've got a lot of pieces to pick up on the ground, to go back to my image. And it takes a long time to clean out a place and kind of rebuild and get restarted. Anybody that's renovated a house or anything like that knows that we got to take the time, but to do it right, and not to do it haphazardly or too quickly.
Well, Father Graffis, just to piggyback on the word you stole out of my mouth, I'm not optimistic, but I'm extremely hopeful. And there's a difference between the two terms, optimism and hopefulness, because hope is rooted in our people of faith, rooted in God. And I believe all things with God, that all things are possible. And I think that I'm beginning to see evidence of it. To quote Dr. King, some of his famous quotes: "A lie crushed to the ground can't live forever. That truth crushed to the ground will rise again." He would also say that the truth forever on the scalpel, wrong forever on the throne, yet truth sways the future behind the dim unknown, standing with God in the shadows looking down upon his own. So I see all of those kind of hopeful realities rooted in God, that God specializes in things like that, bringing peace out of chaos. The world was in chaos before he came to it. So he's specializing in bringing order out of chaos. That's his specialty. So I think he's going to do that. If he did what he did on Easter, on so-called Bad Friday, which came Good Friday, I think he can handle this situation moving forward. I'm very hopeful because of that.
Need to hear from Marian.
Yes, well, for some reason, I keep thinking about the story of the prodigal son. You know, he kind of insulted his father, said, you know, I kind of wish you were dead so that I could have my inheritance. Give me my money. And he goes off, and gets the money, and he lives frivolously and immorally, spends all that money, and finally hits bottom. And it's only at that point that he turns around and he goes back and he finds grace and acceptance. There's a lot more to that story than that. Some people identify more with the older brother and don't like to see themselves as the prodigal son. But the hope that I have, speaking to your question, John, is that maybe we've hit bottom. You know, maybe this is a painful look. All year long it's been painful because we've had so much we've had to confront honestly about ourselves as a nation. This is just one episode of it. Maybe coming out of this in 2021, we will have that reckoning, and reckonings can be good for you if you head on back and receive the grace and become a community again.
I would just build on that real quickly. The other great parable is the Good Samaritan parable. And it seems like we're kind of bandaged in a ditch. And many people on both sides of the issue are bandaged in a ditch. And we can't avoid it. We can't walk by it. Somebody like a Good Samaritan says, okay, I'm going to take him. I'm going to try to clean him up. I'm going to try to, and I'll be back. And I'll pay whatever is necessary to get it back together. I think those two great parables are certainly images that could help us at this time.
1 minute left. Who'd like to wrap this up in a bow as we close today?
What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that does too little of. Hey.
Oh, you should sing that. Come on, Clay.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it, okay?
Well, I'm grateful. Stan, go ahead.
I think our prayers have to go with our new president, Joe Biden, and our new vice president, Kamala Harris, and that God will watch over them and move them and definitely protect them, their families, and our families as well.
Thank you, Rabbi Emeritus Stan Miles, for those closing words, and thank you to Dr. Marian Taylor, Reverend Clay Calloway, and Father Joe Graffis. We'll be back again next week with another edition of Moral Side of the News. Until then, be safe and stay well, and have a great week. Thank you, panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.